Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to a new video. So today we are going to talk about the repository pattern, a really common pattern, one of the first patterns developers learn when they're starting on web development. But before we talk about that, I'm going to ask you to leave a like and subscribe if you want to help me and help me continue making this kind of content, free content. On the description there's a link to my newsletter. I'm creating a test-driven development course, and I am going to announce it there on Twitter. So you can follow me on Twitter and follow the newsletter through the description. Anyway, back to the main topic. We are going to talk about the repository pattern. It's a really common pattern. I particularly don't really like it for most situations, and I am going to talk about this on the video, but it's a really common pattern. Sometimes jobs ask you if you know this when you're applying for a role. They'll ask about this. Sometimes you are going to be required to use this in your job, so I think it's useful talking about it here. If you haven't checked that out, I have a video on swappable implementations and on dependency injection in the container. Those videos are going to be useful on this lesson. You can check them on the description as well. But anyway, let's jump into the code. So see you in a minute or a second. Okay, so I made this little diagram to show you guys what a repository is. More often than not, it is used this way. So you have your controller and you need to use the payment model, the one we've been using on the past two lessons. Instead of instantiating the payment model or doing queries through it, you are going to do them through the payment repository. And let me show you guys this. So here we have it. Let me close the other tabs. And it looks something like this. So on your controller, if we go to our payments controller, you would fetch a payment doing something like this. First, you would inject the payment repository. So payment repository. We've talked about dependency injection on the last lesson. So if you don't know what this is, check that out. And then you would do this, and let's set it right here. So you probably would fetch them like this. So if you want all payments, you would say payment repository get all, something like that. And you can see that it's just proxying the calls to the Eloquent model, to our model that we are injecting here. Let's go back to the diagram. So this is how it is often used. And I think this use of repositories doesn't make sense because you are just proxying calls. So people say that sometimes they use this because they want to have some more specific methods like over amount or things like that, constraints. But this could easily be a query scope. You could do payment over amount 50, something like that. That could be a query scope just fine. I just don't see a reason for this to be on this class. So you are just adding a new abstraction layer. So you're adding a bridge between your controller and the model that does not really serve any purpose. It does nothing. It just proxies the calls. And the other situation that we see people using it, and that one does make sense, but I'm going to talk about why I don't like it on Laravel projects right now in a few minutes, is this one. So right now what we're doing is on this one, we are injecting this class, calling this class methods, and it calls the payment model. What I call, and I'm doing the quotes thing with my hands, the real repository pattern is something like this. So instead of injecting a class, you inject an interface. We've talked about this on the dependency injection lesson. You inject payment repository interface, and you instruct Laravel or Symfony or whatever you use to fetch the proper repository. So if you are running Laravel, it would usually fetch Eloquent payment repository. You want to use Eloquent. But if you've inherited or if you want to change later, you could also have the Doctrine payment repository. The Eloquent payment repository calls the payment model, and the Doctrine would call the Doctrine model. Now, the reason why you do this is because right here you have a swappable implementation. you should be able to effortless I don't know how to say this word, effortless I don't know how to say, effortlessly switch between the Eloquent payment repository and the Doctrine payment repository. Your application, the controller, shouldn't really know which one you are using. It just needs to get the right data, that's all. And that's the intent. The intent is to have you seamlessly switch between those two. So, I don't know, you are using Eloquent and later down the road you want to change to Doctrine. You could just swap the implementation and your app should work as normal. And that's what the repository pattern is. The reason why I don't like this is because what are the odds of you changing from Eloquent to Doctrine? And let's say you do. One major caveat of this pattern in the scenario we're talking about is that you have to return a standard data structure. So Eloquent returns Eloquent collections that are supersets of collections. So not they only have the collections features, they also have the Eloquent collection features. While Doctrine returns, if I'm not mistaken, an object. It returns a standard object or an array, I don't know. But anyway, they return different things. So even if you were to inject an interface and then instruct Laravel what to fetch, and if you wanted to change something down the road, you would still face this issue. You would still have to change a lot of code because this one returns one thing and this one returns collections. Is there any way to fix this? Yes, there is. What you could do is, instead of returning collections here, you would process them on the controller and return plain arrays. So you would do something like, when you get all of them, you'd say all of them to array. You would actually have to map through the objects and change this because I just talked about the wrapper. Right here we have a collection, right here we have an array. But the objects themselves are different. Right here you have an Eloquent model, right here I don't remember, I think you have either an array or a standard object. Anyway, they're different. You wouldn't be able to use them. To have the ability to change, to switch between implementations on the fly, you would have to fetch your models through Eloquent, iterate through each one of them, convert them to a simple object or to an array, and get rid of the collection. So you would return something like an array and then an object. So let's just use this notation and your stuff. So the caveat here is that you need to use something that is standard for both implementations. Your controller shouldn't receive a collection, because if it receives a collection, once you change from Eloquent to Doctrine, you'll have to change a lot of code. And that's why I don't like the repository pattern on Laravel projects specifically, because there's this caveat. So it would look something like this. Let me show you guys. I wrote some files. If we go here, we have the Eloquent payment repository, and we have the payment repository interface. And it defines a simple API, get all, find, and over amount. And the implementation just forwards those to the model. And on our app service provider, we've talked about this on the other lesson, we would just instruct Laravel to use the Eloquent payment repository whenever we wanted it. And it works fine. But we stumble on the problem. If you want to use the repository pattern as it should be used, you have to basically get rid of one of Laravel's most powerful features, Eloquent, and collections. So I don't think it's a good trade-off. The odds of you switching from Eloquent to anything else are very low, very, very low. You either do this in the beginning of the project or you usually do not do this. And yeah, that's the reason I do not like the repository pattern for those cases. Now, where do I like this pattern? I like this pattern on things that require that you have multiple implementations. So for instance, when Laravel handles sessions or handles jobs, you can have jobs being processed by Redis or through the database or through, I don't even know all the options. But you have several drivers that can power jobs. And Laravel does not really care what driver you're using. And I mean this on the class that handles this. What it does is it has an interface that all implementations follow. So Redis, file, database, they all follow this implementation. And depending on what you give, what your environment, what your configuration is, Laravel is going to use a different implementation. So Laravel does some things a little bit differently than this, but in short, it's the same concept. You have multiple classes, you have swappable implementations that follow an interface, and you can use any one of them. Laravel Horizon uses repositories a lot. On another example that I really like, it doesn't have swappable implementations because it runs in Redis. But for instance, you don't really have a standard way to fetch, I don't know, tagged jobs. It uses Redis under the hood, and you don't have an ORM for Redis, something like Eloquent for Redis. So what it does is encapsulate all of this functionality inside repositories. And I'm going to show you guys, one sec. So take a look at this. We have this Redis metrics repository, and it does implement the metrics repository. But if we search, that is the only repository that we have. So we just follow an interface, but we only have the Redis repository. And in this case, this is a great option to organize your code. For instance, measure jobs. This is a little bit of a complex operation. You have to connect to Redis, you have to collect them, then you have to map them. So it's good to encapsulate those things in an object like this one. But I mean, this is just a semantic thing. Some people would call this a service, so they could call Redis metrics service. And for organizing your code, I think it's a great thing. I particularly, for Eloquent, I would rather use query scopes in most cases. But I do think that for this purpose, it works. Now, for the purpose of effortlessly switching between Eloquent and Doctrine and anything, I don't think it works. I think it's a very bad choice, and I think you should not do it. But for organizing your code and your architecture, I think it's a great way to do this, especially when you have things, especially when you rely on a lot of things like Redis, or you rely a lot on stored files, so you could encapsulate a lot of functionality on a class that handles this. But your mileage may vary. So my opinion is that using this for Eloquent is not a good choice. But using this for things like this, what I'm showing you guys, dealing with Redis, dealing with files, dealing with something, another external service that you use, I think it's a great thing. And I would probably make another video about this, about how Horizon handles this. Mohammed might have one already, Mohammed, one of the Laravel developers. If he does, I'm going to link in the description. But that's it, guys. It's a really simple concept. Let's go back here. It just means that you are injecting an interface and you are instructing Laravel to use this or this one. And the concept is to allow you to switch, but I don't like it. And when I use it, it's simply to handle organization on my code. So if I have, if I'm interacting with Redis a lot or with files or anything like that, I'm either creating a payment a repository or a service. I think it just goes down to semantics. The purpose is the same. A lot of people use this just to organize their code as well, but I rather do this on query scopes. So that's it, guys. If you've liked the video, please leave a subscribe and a like. And I was going to say leave a like and subscribe. But yeah, that's it. And of course, go down to the description and subscribe to my course, so I can let you know when it is ready or close to ready. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for another videos. Bye bye.